We had a saying on the Veth Conclave diplomatic circuit: every species, given enough time, learns what it cannot survive. The DRA-Veth learned they could not survive a war of attrition with a species that had invented a single, specific word, for the act of continuing to fight after you have already decided you are going to die. That word is spite. I am Secondary Intelligence Officer Kelmath, seconded to the 7th Observation Cadre, and I watched the no capitulation protocol unfold across 11 weeks, for star systems, and what my superior later described in his official resignation letter as an encounter with a form of tactical cognition that does not respond to conventional threat modeling. I was there. I logged everything. And I still don't fully understand what I saw. What I can tell you is this: they didn't win because they were stronger. They won because when we finally broke them completely, structurally, on paper, by every metric we had, they looked at the math. And they started laughing. What follows is my observer's log. I've included the timestamps. All of them. It's a habit I can't shake. Start at entry 001 if you want to understand how we got here. Start at entry 044 if you want to understand why none of us sleep well anymore. The first thing I noticed was the smell. I know that sounds irrelevant. It is irrelevant. But I notice smells the way some officers notice movement, involuntarily, cataloged without permission, logged before I can decide whether they matter. The Veth observation deck smelled of coolant compound and the specific anxiety marker that DRA-Veth secretaries of state apparently exude when they've just received bad news. It smells like copper and burnt sugar. The whole observation deck smelled like that for 3 hours before Commander Drachet finally turned to me and said, "The human unit has not retreated." "I know," I said. "They have been cut off for 19 hours. "I know." He looked at me the way superiors look at subordinates when they want to say, "Then, why are you just standing there without the career consequences of saying it?" I clicked my logging chip twice, a habit, a tick, a thing I do when I need to feel like information is being preserved against the possibility that everyone else loses their minds. Entry 002 4 hours 19 minutes and 1 second, let me back up. The DRA-Veth entered the Resh corridor 6 weeks prior with what their strategic council called an unassailable positional advantage. 3 fleets. Coordinated surface suppression teams. Control of every major transit node in a 40 light-minute radius. Against them, 1 human rapid response battalion, misrouted during a resupply operation, caught entirely out of position when the DRA-Veth moved. It should have been a footnote. A territorial absorption. The humans would withdraw or capitulate, the DRA-Veth would absorb the corridor, and the broader political situation would resolve in a predictable direction. I was there to observe and file neutrality reports. My cadre's entire function was to watch and timestamp. We were not military. We were not diplomats. We were clerks with very expensive equipment and a mandate to witness. So I witnessed. Entry 007, 6 hours 44 minutes and 19 seconds. The human commander's name was Sergeant First Class Adise Nwolfer. I did not know that at the time. She was, at that point, a heat signature in a collapsed tunnel network beneath the third platform of what had been a transit hub before the DRA-Veth's first bombardment turned it into a very precisely organized pile of rubble. The DRA-Veth called the bombardment infrastructure negation. When I later saw footage of what was left, I thought, they didn't negate the infrastructure. They just rearranged it into shapes a human could use. That is not a criticism. It is an observation. I am a witness. I observe. But they should have checked what a human does with rubble. Entry 011, 9 hours 33 minutes and 7 seconds. The first indication that this would not be a footnote came from a DRA-Veth surface team lead named Tactical Sub-Officer Griethus, who filed a report at 9:33 that I will summarize as follows. We went to verify the tunnel network was cleared and something threw a load-bearing strut at our scanner drone. The strut had been stripped from the collapsed transit hub. It had been sharpened. It had been thrown with sufficient velocity to disable the drone and, based on the impact pattern, had been thrown by hand. Sub-Officer Griethus's exact words in the follow-up were, "The debris field appears to be occupied." He said debris field. Like it was a weather phenomenon. Like it was a thing happening to them, and not a thing being done. Entry 016 at 12 hours 2 minutes and 44 seconds, Commander Narration reviewed the scout reports and made a decision that, in retrospect, I should have flagged as the first strategic miscalculation. He ordered the tunnel network compressed. In practical terms, for surface teams converged on the debris field with sound dispersal ordnance, collapsing the upper tunnel architecture inward on itself. The intention was to deny the humans depth. To force them upward, into open sightlines, where the DRAV's positional advantage would matter. I logged, entry 017 to 12 hours 14 minutes and 30 seconds, compression op initiated. Human heat signatures have not dispersed. Signatures are moving deeper. Deeper. Into the newly collapsed sections. I remember thinking, the ordnance just made the debris field larger. They just gave them more rubble. I didn't say it out loud. It wasn't my role to say it out loud. I clicked my logging chip and filed the timestamp and watched the heat signatures do something the sensor operator described, with quiet horror, as nesting. Entry 022 15 hours 55 minutes and 10 seconds, by hour 19, the DRAVeth had committed 2 additional surface teams, lost 4 more drones, and received a report that one of their sonic perimeter units had been disassembled, not destroyed, disassembled, and the components were missing. I asked the sensor operator what that meant. He said he didn't know. I asked Narration. He said, it means they're building something. With our equipment? Apparently. There was a pause that lasted about 4 seconds, which is, for a DRAVeth flag level officer, equivalent to approximately 17 seconds of visible alarm. What are they building? I asked. We don't know yet. Entry 023 15 hours 57 minutes and 44 seconds. I want to be precise about the emotional texture of this period, because it matters for what came later. The DRAVeth were not afraid. Fear is not quite the right word for what was happening in that observation room. The word, if I were going to find one in my own language, is closer to vertigo. The specific sensation of looking down and discovering that what you thought was solid ground is actually a painted surface stretched over a hole of indeterminate depth. They had a human battalion trapped in a debris field. Surrounded. Cut off. Outgunned by a factor that should not require debating. The situation was, by every tactical model they had, resolved. And, yet, the situation kept doing things. Sergeant Nwofer, I would later learn, had spent the first 9 hours doing 3 things simultaneously, redistributing her unit into the deepest sections of the collapsed tunnel structure, cataloging every piece of DRAVeth equipment that had fallen within range during the bombardment, and apparently explaining to her unit with great calm and total specificity exactly what they were going to do and why they were going to be fine. I know this because I eventually obtained the unit's internal comm logs. The earliest entry I found was at hour 3. A junior member of her unit said, approximately, Sarge, we have no way out and they have our exit points locked. She said, yeah. So they think they know where we're going. That's useful. How is that useful? Because now we know what they're expecting. And, we're not going there. She sounded, in the recording, as though she were discussing a scheduling conflict. A minor inconvenience. An administrative problem with a perfectly solvable bureaucratic solution. I played that recording 4 times. Entry 029, 19 hours 3 minutes and 22 seconds, hour 19. Commander Narration says, the human unit has not retreated. I say, I know. And, what I am actually thinking, in that moment, is, they're not going to. Not because I have evidence. Not because I have run the models. But, because I have spent the last 19 hours watching heat signatures move through a collapsed debris field with the steady, purposeful rhythm of something that knows exactly where it is going, and I have a feeling unscientific, unlogged, deeply unprofessional, that we are not watching a trapped unit waiting to die. We are watching something waiting to be underestimated one more time. I click my logging chip. Entry 031, 20 hours 17 minutes and 9 seconds, at 2017, the assembled DRAVeth equipment that had gone missing reappeared. It reappeared as a sound. Later analysis would determine that Sergeant Wolfer's unit had stripped 3 sonic perimeter emitters, reversed their broadcast polarity using components from 2 disabled DRAVeth scanner drones, and constructed a directional burst array aimed at the primary surface team's communication relay. They fried the relay. Not the fleet communication. Just the relay. Just the one node that the surface teams used to coordinate with each other in real time during close-quarter operations. It was, in tactical terms, a very small thing. In practical terms, it meant the 4 DRAVeth surface teams surrounding the debris field suddenly could not hear each other. What happened next was that Sergeant Wolfer's unit moved. They moved fast. They moved in a direction nobody had anticipated, which was straight through the wall of the transit hub's lower maintenance corridor, a wall that had been partially destabilized by the compression ordnance, that nobody had accounted for as a viable exit because it led directly toward a second DRAVeth surface team rather than away from one. The logic of that decision only makes sense if you understand that a DRAVeth surface team that cannot communicate with the other 3 surface teams and, suddenly, has a human unit emerging from a wall directly at them is, for approximately 90 seconds, operating on incomplete information. 90 seconds, Sergeant Wolfer would later say, was plenty. Entry 034 20 hours 44 minutes and 51 seconds. I want to note, for the record, that no one in that observation room said anything for approximately 4 minutes after the sensor operator reported what was happening. Narration's aide pulled up the model projections. The model projected a 97.3% certainty of human unit neutralization. The model had been generated 11 hours ago. Nobody updated the model. I think about that a lot. Entry 035, 21 hours, hour 21. Sergeant Wolfer's unit broke the outer perimeter. Not all of them. Not cleanly. 3 of her people were down. I later confirmed 2 injured, 1 Kia, a young soldier named Corporal Ibarra whose name I have in my logs and whose family I will never meet and whose presence in this account feels like the only honest thing I can offer. This was not a clean victory. I want to be precise about that. But, they broke through. Into the open transit corridor, past the first surface team's position, moving toward the secondary DRAVeth logistics line with the specific, purposeful momentum of people who have decided, somewhere in the last 21 hours, that they are not finished yet. Commander Narration said, "Initiate containment protocol." His aide said, "Which one?" He said, "All of them." I logged it. Entry 039, 22 hours 15 minutes and 34 seconds, the thing I keep returning to, the thing I still return to, months later, filing observer reports from a desk that smells only of recycled air and my own very mediocre meal supplements, is this: at no point did Sergeant Wolfer's unit appear to be operating from desperation. Desperate units make noise. They make fast decisions and loud movements and communication patterns that are identifiable as panic even through encrypted channels. The behavioral markers are well documented. I have filed reports on desperate units. I know what they look like on a sensor readout. This looked like a shift rotation. Like 40 people showing up to a job they had done before, doing the tasks in order, checking them off. One of her unit's internal comms, logged at hour 14, in what I can only assume was a brief rest period, was someone asking if anyone still had any of the instant coffee packets from the resupply that had gotten them into this mess in the first place. Someone apparently had 4. They were apparently distributed. I have thought about those coffee packets more than I have thought about most officially significant things in my career. Entry 042, 23 hours 58 minutes and 11 seconds. By the end of hour 24, Sergeant Wolfer's unit had not been neutralized. They had not retreated. They had not surrendered. They had destroyed 1 relay node, disabled 2 surface teams through a combination of improvised sonic equipment and aggressive close-quarter action, and were now, according to the sensor operator's very quiet report, positioned inside the DRAVeth logistics corridor. Inside it. Not attacking it from outside. Inside it. Within it. Occupying it the way a splinter occupies a hand, small, unreachable, and making every movement hurt. Commander Narration looked at the display for a long time. Then, he said, "What is the no capitulation protocol?" His aide said, "It's a human military doctrine." It means they've formally designated that no terms of surrender will be accepted or offered by their unit. Who activates it? The commanding officer, on site. When did she activate it? The aide checked. He checked for a long time. Hour 1, he said. She activated it at hour 1. The observation room was quiet. I clicked my logging chip. Entry 043, 2 minutes and 47 seconds, hour 1. She activated it at hour 1. Before the compression ordnance. Before the relay sabotage. Before any of it. Before she knew if any of it would work. The protocol, in human military framework, does not mean we will fight to the last. I looked it up. That's the common misconception. What it actually means, the operational definition, buried in their strategic doctrine, is, we have decided the outcome of this engagement is non-negotiable, so we are removing the option of negotiation from our own cognitive load, and, we are operating purely on execution. She removed the option. At hour 1. So that she and her unit would never have to spend a single moment of the next 24 hours calculating whether surrender was worth considering. They didn't fight like they had nothing to lose. They fought like they had already decided what they were keeping. Entry 044, 4 minutes and 10 seconds. I told you to start here if you want to understand why none of us sleep well anymore. I'm still not sure I can explain it properly. But, I think it's this: there is a category of opponent that your tactical models account for: the cornered enemy, the desperate hold, the final charge. These are documented. These are survivable. There are protocols for them. There is no protocol, in any DRAVEF strategic framework I have ever reviewed, for an opponent who removed the option of surrender before the battle began, not because they expected to lose, but because they thought it would slow them down. The logistics corridor was, before Sergeant Nwolfer's unit occupied it, a very ordinary piece of DRAVEF infrastructure. It connected the primary surface team staging area to the fleet resupply drop points. It was 12 meters wide and approximately 2 kilometers long, running beneath the remains of the transit hub in a straight line that someone had clearly designed for efficiency rather than defensibility. There were no natural choke points. There were no secondary access tunnels. There was a lighting array on a 16-second cycle and a ventilation system that, I learned from the maintenance logs, had been due for its quarterly filter replacement 6 weeks ago. Nobody had replaced the filters. Sergeant Nwolfer's unit found this out because the air in the corridor smelled terrible. I know this because they mentioned it repeatedly in the internal comm logs I eventually obtained. With a level of very specific frustration that I found disproportionate until I remembered that they had been inside a collapsed debris field for 21 hours before they got there, and the smell of a ventilation system with a deferred maintenance issue was apparently the specific indignity that broke their collective silence. One of her soldiers, Private Yusuf, whom I will identify by name because he appears in this log approximately 11 more times and he deserves the acknowledgement, said, "What in the entire world is that smell?" Sergeant Nwolfer said, "DRAVEF environmental systems. Filters. They're fine." "They're definitely not fine, Sarge. You're alive in a corridor instead of dead in a debris field. The smell is fine." A pause. "Yeah, okay." Entry 047, 1 hour 3 minutes and 55 seconds. In the observation room, Commander Narration's aide was explaining the problem in terms that I think were intended to be diplomatic. "The corridor is occupied," he said. "I am aware," said Narration. "Occupied in a way that makes standard extraction, I am aware. The issue is that they've positioned in the ventilation access points. All of them. The ones we'd need for I am aware." He was aware of approximately 17 problems simultaneously, and he was handling this in the way that DRAVEF officers of a certain rank handle multiple simultaneous problems, by going very still and making everyone else in the room afraid to speak. I was not afraid to speak. It's not that I'm particularly brave. It's that I'm an observer, and observers are, institutionally, slightly outside the hierarchy of consequences. I can ask the stupid question. That's most of my value. How did they know about the ventilation access points? I asked. A long pause.
They didn't, said the aide, after checking. They found them. The access hatches are standard maintenance design, visible from inside the corridor. So they found them and immediately occupied them. Within 12 minutes of entering the corridor, yes. I clicked my logging chip. 12 minutes. Entry 051, 2 hours 44 minutes and 18 seconds. I want to talk about what happened to the observation room over the next 8 hours, because it is, I think, the part of this account that is the most honest and the most difficult to write. Nothing happened. I mean that precisely. Nothing in the corridor changed. Sergeant Nolfer's unit did not advance and did not retreat. They occupied the ventilation access points and held them. The DRAVeth's 4 surface teams could not clear the corridor without a direct engagement in a 12-meter space that would be, to put it gently, chaotic. The fleet's bombardment ordnance could not be used on a corridor directly beneath active DRAVeth supply infrastructure without risking the supply infrastructure. The humans were, in a strictly military sense, contained. They were also, in a strictly practical sense, impossible to remove. The observation room spent 8 hours with this fact. Commander Narration ordered 2 tactical reviews, 1 strategic assessment, and 1 communication to Fleet Command that I later obtained fragments of and that I will summarize as, the situation is developing. Additional options are being evaluated. Current timeline for resolution is, under review. Under review is DRAVeth diplomatic language for, we do not know. Entry 057, 6 hours 11 minutes and 40 seconds. At hour 31, Sergeant Nolfer did something that I did not log as significant at the time. She sent a message. Not to Fleet Command. Not a surrender communication. Not even a distress signal. It went to the secondary resupply corridor, the one 2 kilometers east of where her unit was sitting, and it was, in its entirety, 7 words addressed to whatever DRAVeth logistics officer was managing the resupply schedule. The 7 words were, "We know your rotation schedule. Move it." I obtained this later. I sat with it for a while. She knew their rotation schedule. 31 hours into being cut off, with no external communication, inside a captured enemy logistics corridor, she had reverse-engineered the DRAVeth resupply rotation from the traffic patterns she could observe through the access hatches. And she told them she knew. Not to demand anything. Not as a tactical threat. Just as a statement of fact. As a small, pointed way of saying, we are paying attention. We are building the map. We are not waiting to be rescued. We are learning you. The DRAVeth logistics officer moved the rotation. Entry 059, 7 hours 32 minutes and 3 seconds. In the observation room, someone brought in a tray of what I believe were nutrition supplements, because someone had apparently decided this had become a long-term event requiring sustained cognitive function. I ate one. It tasted like reconstituted mineral and mild regret. Narration was on his 4th communication to Fleet Command. Fleet Command was, based on the fragments I could hear, growing impatient with phrases like under review. Give me options, Narration said to the room. The room gave him 4 options. Option 1, direct assault on the corridor. Projected outcome, corridor cleared. Projected cost, extensive. The 12-meter space, the ventilation access points, the units demonstrated adaptability. Nobody in the room said the word unacceptable, but the silence after option 1 was described lasted long enough to mean the same thing. Option 2, wait them out. Resources, oxygen, food. The humans had been in the field for 31 hours and counting and had no resupply. Projected timeline, difficult to calculate. Sergeant Nolfer had apparently packed her unit's remaining food supply into the access hatches when they first entered the corridor. We didn't know how much they had. Nobody had thought to check, during the initial assessment, what a human unit on a misrouted resupply run might be carrying. Turns out, a lot. They were on a resupply run. Option 3, negotiate. This option was presented by the junior tactical officer and received a silence that lasted substantially longer than option 1's silence. They're under no capitulation protocol, Narration said. Protocol can be, it can't. It's a doctrine,
not their commanding officer removed the option.
40 hours ago. Nobody had anything to say to that. Option 4, reconfigure the strategic objective. Stop trying to remove the unit from the corridor.
Accept the corridor is temporarily inaccessible and route supply operations through the eastern transit channels. That adds 6 hours to every resupply cycle, said the aide.
Yes, said Narration.
For as long as they're in there.
Yes.
The silence that followed option 4 was the longest one yet.
Entry 063, 10 hours 19 minutes and 55 seconds, I went to get something to drink.
The observation deck had a dispensary unit that produced a beverage that I can only describe as what would happen if someone heard the concept of coffee described in a language they didn't speak and, then, made something based on the description without ever tasting the original.
It was brown. It was hot. It had a quality that I have since come to think of as enthusiastically wrong. I drank it. I think about that dispensary unit the way some people think about formative religious experiences.
I was on my second cup when Private Yusuf appeared in the internal comm logs again.
He had been doing something.
For the past 3 hours, based on the access hatch sensors, he had been doing something in ventilation node 4 that involved a significant amount of physical activity and occasional quiet swearing.
The sensor report could not determine what. At hour 36, he emerged from node 4 and said to whoever was nearby, "Okay, it works." Someone said, "What works?" He said, "Ventilation node 4." I rerouted the airflow from the 3 bad filters into the secondary outflow. Smell's gonna be better in about 20 minutes. A pause. You fixed the ventilation system. I mean, partially.
The filters still need replacing.
But, the smell should Yusuf, we are hiding from an alien military in an enemy logistics corridor.
Yeah, and, the smell was really bad. I cannot tell you why I have thought about this moment as many times as I have. I can tell you that it is the thing I come back to most when I try to explain to other observers, to colleagues, to my supervisor when she asks why my reports from this posting are consistently longer than required, what these people were like. They were hiding from an alien military in an enemy logistics corridor. And, one of them fixed the ventilation system. Because the smell was bad.
Entry 068, 14 hours 55 minutes and 34 seconds, hour 45. The DRAVEF fleet had begun rerouting supply operations through the eastern transit channels.
Fleet Command had sent 2 communications expressing, in very formal language, their expectations regarding timeline for corridor resolution. Narration had sent 2 communications back expressing, in equally formal language, that the situation was being managed. I noticed, and logged, that he had stopped saying under review. He'd switched to managed.
I'm not sure that was better.
Entry 071, 17 hours 22 minutes and 7 seconds, at hour 49, Sergeant Wolfer sent a second message.
This one went to Fleet Command.
Not her Fleet Command.
DRAVEF Fleet Command. Addressed to the flag officer. I obtained this message. I have read it many times. I will reproduce it precisely because I think paraphrasing it would be dishonest. It said, "We've been in your logistics corridor for 49 hours. We have not destroyed your infrastructure, interfered with your supply operations, or harmed any of your personnel who did not first attempt to harm us. We have not done these things because we are not interested in escalation and because we believe the corridor has more value as a demonstration than as wreckage. The demonstration is this: you cannot remove us without a cost you've decided you don't want to pay. We cannot leave without a corridor to leave through. These 2 facts are both true at the same time. We'll be here. No demands. No timeline. No terms. Just we'll be here." Entry 074, 18 hours 9 minutes and 22 seconds, I showed the message to Commander Narration. He read it twice. He said, "She's not trying to win." I said, "What do you mean?" "She's not trying to take the corridor. She's not trying to destroy it. She's not trying to negotiate out of it." He set the message down. "She's trying to make us make a decision." "What decision?" "Any decision. He looked at the logistics display. The eastern route was 6 hours longer. 6 hours per cycle. The corridor had been occupied for 49 hours. She's turned our own infrastructure into a problem we have to keep solving. Every day she's in there is a day we're paying the cost of having her in there. And, if she stays indefinitely? He didn't answer that. I think the answer was, that's the point. Entry 078 21 hours 3 minutes and 11 seconds, hour 53. Private Yusuf, in the internal comms, reported that the ventilation was now significantly improved and offered what I believe was a genuine review of the air quality in each of the 6 access hatches on a scale from fine to actually good, surprisingly. Node 4 received an actually good, surprisingly. Sergeant Nwolfer said, Yusuf. He said, yeah, Sarge. She said, stop fixing their systems. A pause. It was bothering me. I know. Do you want me to put it back? A longer pause. No. It's fine. Leave it. Another pause. But, stop. Yes, Sarge. Entry 081 23 hours 44 minutes and 2 seconds, hour 55. I filed my observer report for the cycle. My supervisor, receiving it on the other end of a relay that added approximately 4 seconds of lag to every communication, sent back a single-line response, how long do you think this goes? I sat with that question for a while. Then, I wrote back, I don't think she's thinking in those terms. My supervisor did not respond to that. I drank the wrong coffee. I thought about Corporal Ibarra, whose name was in my logs, who was Kia at hour 21 in the move through the transit corridor, and who had been part of the unit that Sergeant Nwolfer had looked in the eye at hour 1 and said, no surrender. We're executing. He had said yes. 40 people had said yes. At hour 1, before they knew if any of it would work. I clicked my logging chip. Entry 084, 15 minutes and 9 seconds, end of cycle 2. The corridor was still occupied. The eastern route was still adding 6 hours per cycle. Fleet Command had sent a third communication. Narration had not responded yet. I added one personal note to the observer log, which I am not required to do and which I have never done before and which I will include here because I think it is the most accurate thing I wrote during this entire posting. Personal note, KL Math, 15 minutes and 9 seconds. I have observed 16 military engagements across my career as a witness. I have logged superior firepower overcoming smaller forces, I have logged tactical retreats, I have logged sieges and negotiations and strategic withdrawals and last stands. I know what a contained unit looks like. I know what trapped looks like. This does not look like either of those things. This looks like someone who decided, at hour 1, that the outcome was already determined and spent the next 55 hours being correct about it. I do not fully understand what I am watching. I think that might be the point. Fleet Command stopped using formal language at entry 85. I know this because I have all the communications, and there is a distinct shift in tone between the third message, which used phrases like we express our expectation that resolution proceed with all due expedience, and the fourth message, which said, in its entirety, how is this still happening? Not a question. No punctuation at the end. Just a statement of incredulity formatted as inquiry. Narration replied. I didn't see the reply. I know from his aide's expression when he sent it that it contained the phrase under reassessment. Under reassessment is Narration formal language for, we have run out of the other phrases. Entry 089, 4 hours 22 minutes and 19 seconds, hour 61. I want to describe the observation room at hour 61, because I think the room is a more accurate record of what the no capitulation protocol does than any tactical analysis. Commander Narration was in the corner reviewing logistics projections. His aide was handling fleet communications. The sensor operator was on his second continuous shift, because his replacement had come in at hour 48, looked at the readouts for approximately 12 minutes, and requested a reassignment on grounds that I believe amounted to personal distress. The reassignment had not been processed. He was still there. There were 6 empty dispensary cups stacked near my station. I had been counting them. It's a thing I do. I count things. I click the logging chip. I count the cups. It keeps the part of my brain that wants to process what I'm watching busy with something neutral. 6 cups. 61 hours. 40 people in a logistics corridor. 40 people whose commanding officer had, at hour 1, removed the option of surrender from the cognitive load of the entire unit and said, "Run the plan." Just run the plan. Entry 091 5 hours 40 minutes and 11 seconds, at hour 63, something shifted. Not in the corridor. In us. I logged it as a behavioral change in the observation team, but, I think, in retrospect, that is too clinical. What happened was that somewhere around hour 63, people stopped treating Sergeant Nwolfer's unit as a problem to be solved and started treating them as a fact to be lived with. The aide updated the supply route calculation from temporary diversion to current operating route. Narration stopped checking the corridor sensor feed every 12 minutes. He checked it every 30. Then, every hour. The sensor operator made himself a beverage that was not from the dispensary unit. He had apparently brought something from his personal supplies, and, when I asked what it was, he described it as a fermented grain drink from his home settlement and offered me some. I said no. I have since come to deeply regret that decision on aesthetic grounds. We were adjusting. We were normalizing the abnormal, which is what every living thing does with a problem it cannot remove. You stop trying to solve it and you start building your life around it. Sergeant Nwolfer had made herself a structural feature. Entry 097, 10 hours 15 minutes and 38 seconds, at hour 69, the human fleet arrived. Not all of it. Not the majority of it. 3 ships. Positioned at the outer edge of the transit corridor's sensor range, which is a distance that says, in military spatial language, "We are here. We see you. We are not attacking. Yet." Fleet Command sent a 5th communication. This one went to the DRAVF Flag Admiral rather than to Narration. Narration found out about it from his aide, who found out about it from a junior officer who had overheard something, and the way Naration's expression changed when he heard is something I cannot describe accurately except to say that it looked like a man realizing he had been playing the wrong game. The 3 ships were not there to rescue Sergeant Nwolfer's unit. They were there because Sergeant Nwolfer's unit had been in a DRAVF logistics corridor for 69 hours, and that was long enough for the signal, the fact of their continued presence, the fact of the no capitulation protocol still active, the fact that the DRAVF had not been able to remove them, to travel up the chain in both directions. She had made them a signal. She had always been making them a signal. Entry 099, 11 hours 32 minutes and 4 seconds, I don't have access to what happened at the Admiral level. I am not cleared for those communications and I did not attempt to obtain them. I am an observer. I witness what I can witness and I log what I can log. What I can tell you is what the corridor looked like at hour 70. The sensor feed showed 40 human heat signatures, distributed across 6 ventilation access nodes and the main corridor floor. Some were moving. Some were stationary. The movement patterns were consistent with a resting rotation, the kind of organized rest that units with discipline maintain when they expect to be operational again soon. They were sleeping in shifts. In an enemy logistics corridor. 69 hours in. Sleeping in shifts. I have spent months trying to find the right word for what I felt when I understood that. The closest I've gotten is recalibration. Like something in my understanding of what a military unit was had been constructed incorrectly and was now being quietly revised. Entry 103, 15 hours 9 minutes and 47 seconds, Private Yusuf, in the internal comms at hour 72, asked Sergeant Nwolfer a question. He said, "Sarge, when did you know it was going to work?" There was a pause. She said, "Hour 3. Hour 3? We didn't do anything at hour 3. Exactly. Another pause. I don't follow. She said, by hour 3, they'd hit the debris field twice and, both times we went deeper instead of coming up. If they were going to just bury us, they'd have done it already. That meant they needed the infrastructure intact. Which meant they couldn't go scorched earth. which meant we had a ceiling on what they were willing to spend to remove us. And once I knew there was a ceiling, I just had to keep the cost above it. A long pause from Private Yusuf. He said, "You could have told us that at hour 3. She said, "I needed you focused, not calculating. Different jobs." He said, "That's a little, Yusuf." "Yeah. Get some sleep." "Yes, Sarge." Entry 107, 19 hours 44 minutes and 2 seconds. At hour 76, Commander Narration received a communication from the Flag Admiral's office. I was not in the room when he read it. I came back from the dispensary, cup 7, the wrong coffee, and the aide was standing near the entrance to the inner office with the specific posture of a person who has been told something and has not yet decided what to do with it. "What happened?" I said. He said, "Strategic reassessment. The corridor is being designated non-operational. We're formally making the eastern route the active supply line." I said, "And the unit?" "Safe passage," he said. "Terms agreed at flag level." Sergeant Nwofer agreed? The protocol was formally closed an hour ago. Her commanding officer, the fleet commander, closed it from his end. Can they do that? Apparently the protocol has a flag-level override that was built in for exactly this kind of situation. When the strategic objective has been achieved at a level above the unit, the officer who activated it doesn't need to be the one who closes it. I thought about that. What was the strategic objective? I asked. The aide looked at me. He was quiet for a moment. "Making us do this," he said. He gestured, vaguely, at the room. The updated supply route. The empty dispensary cups. The sensor feed showing 40 people being permitted to leave a corridor they had occupied for 77 hours. "Making us reassess," he said. "Making us pay the cost until we decided the territory wasn't worth what she could do with it." He paused. She turned 40 people into a strategic argument. And she was right. Entry 111, 22 hours 3 minutes and 15 seconds, I watched them leave. I watched the heat signatures on the sensor feed move out of the ventilation access nodes, down the main corridor, and, through the exit that Narration's aide had arranged, a sealed surface access point, guarded on both ends, clear on either side. 40 signatures entered the corridor at hour 21. 38 signatures left. 2 people did not make it out. Corporal Ibarra, Kia at hour 21. Corporal Vasquez, who died in the corridor at hour 58 from injuries sustained during the initial engagement. I got that from the medical records that were shared as part of the formal passage agreement. I put both names in the log. They're both still there. Entry 114, 23 hours 28 minutes and 40 seconds, I did not see Sergeant Nwofer's face. She was in environmental gear, sensors only, when the feed caught her at the corridor exit. I have a sensor signature and a silhouette and the audio from the brief exchange she had with the DRAVEF surface officer who was supervising the passage. The surface officer said, "Your unit is cleared to proceed." She said, "Yep." Just yep. And then she walked out. Entry 117, 14 minutes and 9 seconds, I filed my final observer report for the engagement at midnight. It was 4 times longer than any observer report I have ever filed. My supervisor sent back a single-line response that said, "This is a lot, Kelmath." I wrote back, "It was a lot." She did not respond. I drank cup 8. Entry 119, 55 minutes and 22 seconds, Commander Narration did something, in the hours after the passage, that I did not log at the time but that I have thought about repeatedly since. He pulled up the No Capitulation Protocol documentation. The formal human military doctrine. He read it for about 20 minutes. He set it down. Then, he asked his aide to find out how many times the protocol had been activated in human military history. The aide researched it. The answer was 47 times, across documented engagements, in the preceding 60 years. Narration said, "How many times was the unit destroyed or captured after activation?" The aide said, 3. Narration said, "And the other 44? Operational success, in various degrees."
ranging from minor tactical advantage to situations like this one.
Narration was quiet. "It works," he said. "Not a question."
"Statistically," said the aide.
"Statistically it works." "Why?"
The aide thought about it.
"Best current analysis," he said, "is that it removes the decision fatigue variable. The unit stops spending cognitive bandwidth on exit scenarios. They only have one track."
Narration said, 47 activations in 60 years.
"That's not a common doctrine."
"No," said the aide.
"It requires a specific kind of unit.
And a specific kind of commanding officer who can look at her people at hour 1 and say, 'We're doing this,' and have them believe it."
Silence.
44 out of 47, said Narration.
"Yes, sir." Another silence.
"File that," he said.
"I want it in the strategic review."
Entry 122, 2 hours 17 minutes and 55 seconds. I have one more thing to log. After the formal passage, after the reports were filed, after Narration went to his rest rotation and the observation room had emptied down to a single watch officer and me with my wrong coffee, I obtained the last internal comm log from Sergeant Nolfer's unit. The final entry, logged 7 minutes before they cleared the corridor exit. It was Private Yusuf. He said, "Sarge, for the record, Node 4 ventilation is significantly better than when we arrived."
"You're welcome, Narration."
A pause. Then, Sergeant Nolfer's voice, very quiet, almost tired, "You're ridiculous, Yusuf.
It's a gift. It's a maintenance repair in an enemy logistics corridor." I was bored.
A pause longer than any of the others in the comm log.
"Then," she said, "Ibarra would have thought it was funny." Nobody said anything after that. They walked out.
Final entry, KL Math, 2 hours 44 minutes and 1 second. I have been an observer for 11 years. I have logged 16 engagements. I have witnessed things that get categorized as decisive, inconclusive, strategic withdrawal, territorial capture. I have a vocabulary for what military engagements look like when they end, and I have, in 11 years, gotten reasonably good at recognizing which category applies.
This one does not fit a category I had before.
Here is what I have: in the absence of a category, 40 people were cut off, surrounded, and outgunned.
Their commanding officer removed the option of surrender at hour 1. They improvised from rubble.
They fixed a ventilation system they had no obligation to fix. They turned a logistics corridor into a strategic argument. They made the people trying to remove them spend 77 hours on a problem that cost more to maintain than to concede. They lost 2 people. They left the corridor walking. And, the thing that I cannot stop thinking about, the thing that I wrote in the margin of my final observer report in a notation that is not official and will not be cited anywhere, she knew at hour 3.
She activated the protocol at hour 1.
There is a 2-hour gap between when she decided to trust her people with the doctrine and when she was certain the doctrine would work. She called it before she had the evidence. And then, she went and collected the evidence.
I don't know what you call that. I know what it looks like.